It happened so fast that even now, I can still hear the echo of the gunshot in my ears. My daughter, just 15, had changed our Wi Fi password after Karen, our next door HOA president, kept using it without permission. I didn't think something so small could push someone to violence. But Karen's obsession with control ran deeper than anyone knew. That morning, she stormed onto our porch, yelling about community cooperation, while my daughter trembled behind the door. Seconds later, a flash, a scream, and blood on the white steps. Everyone in the neighborhood heard the shot. Everyone, but nobody saw what really happened. Or so Karen thought. Because hidden in her own security camera, mounted on her front porch, was the truth she tried to bury. And that single piece of footage would not just expose her, it would destroy her life forever. Where are you watching from? Comment your city below. Before we dive into what happened that day, I want to ask you something. Which city are you watching this from? Drop your city's name in the comments below. I love knowing how far these stories travel across the country. And hey, before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to hear will make you question how far a person's hatred can go over something as harmless as a Wi-Fi password. Now, let me take you back to Willow Creek, a quiet, picture-perfect suburban neighborhood where everyone smiled for appearances, but behind those smiles, tension brewed like a ticking bomb. Our neighbor, Karen Whitmore, was the president of the HOA, the kind of woman who believed every rule was her command. She controlled everything from mailbox colors to where kids could ride their bikes. My daughter, Emily, had always tried to stay out of her way, polite and quiet, just a normal teen who loved reading and video games. But when Emily changed our Wi-Fi password one night to stop Karen from using it without permission, everything spiraled out of control. Karen saw it as defiance, an insult, a personal attack on her authority. She started showing up at our door, shouting about community responsibility and shared resources. We thought she'd cool off, but instead, her behavior turned darker, threats, late-night knocking, even watching our house from across the street. No one could have imagined that a fight over an internet password would lead to a tragedy so cruel, and that the truth, hidden deep within her own security footage, would expose the monster living right next door. And this is where everything began to unravel. It started on a Friday morning, one of those warm, calm mornings where the sunlight hits the white fences and everything looks picture perfect. You'd never think tragedy could be hiding behind those picket fences. My daughter, Emily, had just woken up, her messy hair tied into a loose bun as she grabbed her laptop for schoolwork. The Wi-Fi wasn't working. She sighed, walked to the router, and noticed something strange. Our network was renamed to a HOA-controlled zone. At first, we thought it was a glitch, but when I checked the admin panel, the logins had been changed again. It wasn't the first time Karen had crossed boundaries. She was the type who believed the whole neighborhood belonged to her. She demanded access to our Wi-Fi months ago, claiming HOA needs it for community surveillance cameras. I had refused, but my wife, always the peacemaker, once gave her the password temporarily. Karen never forgot that kindness or the control it gave her. Emily rolled her eyes that morning and said, "Dad, this is ridiculous. I'll just reset it." I remember warning her not to get involved, but she was tired of seeing Karen's name pop up on the device list. "It's our Wi-Fi," she said firmly, her voice carrying a new edge of independence. She reset it, changed the password, and renamed the network Privacy Matters. We didn't know that single act would set off a storm. By noon, Karen was outside, standing in our driveway with her arms crossed, tapping her foot like she owned the ground she stood on. Her short, blonde hair shimmered under the sun, and her HOA badge gleamed proudly. She shouted, "I need access to the network again. The cameras are down, and the HOA will fine you for disrupting community infrastructure." Emily stepped onto the porch, clutching her phone. "It's our Wi-Fi, Ms. Whitmore. We don't owe you anything." The air froze. You could almost feel the tension crackle like electricity. Karen's smile twitched. "You people think rules don't apply to you, huh? I built this neighborhood's order. You'll regret this attitude." Before I could intervene, Karen snapped a photo of our house, muttering something about filing a violation. Emily laughed nervously, trying to defuse the tension, but Karen's eyes, those sharp, cold blue eyes, never left her. There was something in her gaze that morning, something hateful. That night, strange things started happening. Our security lights flickered on and off. Someone knocked on our door at 2 a.m., but when I checked the cameras, no one was there. The next morning, our mailbox was filled with HOA fines, one for unsanctioned Wi-Fi usage, another for property disrespect. It was insane. Emily was shaken, but she tried to brush it off. "She's just being Karen," she said, but her voice trembled when she spoke. I could tell she was scared, even though she didn't want to admit it. I assured her that we'd handle it, that I'd go to the HOA board and file a complaint. What I didn't know was that Karen was the board. Every signature, every decision, every so-called rule went through her. She was the system. 3 days later, everything changed forever. That morning, Emily had gone out to grab a package from the porch. It was early, around 7 a.m. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of sprinklers and birds. Karen was across the street, standing near her car, staring at her phone. She shouted something, but Emily couldn't hear. Then Karen began walking fast, too fast. She was yelling now, her words breaking through the air. "You think you can disrespect me in my neighborhood?" Emily froze. She stepped back, clutching the box. I was in the kitchen, half asleep, pouring coffee when I heard the first scream. "Dad!" The sound tore through my chest. I ran to the window, and that's when I saw it. Karen, standing on our lawn, pointing something shiny, a gun. Before I could even shout, the gun fired. The sound was deafening. Emily collapsed near the steps, the box falling beside her, blood spreading fast through her white t-shirt. My mind went blank. I dropped my mug and sprinted out the door. Karen stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, her face pale, but not panicked, almost satisfied. I fell to my knees beside my daughter. "Emily, stay with me, sweetheart, please." Her eyes fluttered open, tears mixing with pain. "Dad, I just changed the password." My wife came running, screaming, her hands trembling as she called 911. Karen tried to speak, but I shouted at her to back off. The neighbors started gathering, phones out, recording. Some screamed, some cried, but Karen didn't run. She stood there like she'd done nothing wrong, like she was the victim. Within minutes, the sirens filled the air. Police cars surrounded the street. Officers cuffed Karen as she tried to explain herself. It was an accident. She provoked me. She was threatening me. Lies pouring out like poison. But even then, something didn't sit right with me. The police took her statement, secured the weapon, and rushed Emily to the hospital. She was alive, barely. The bullet had grazed her ribs, missing her lungs by an inch. But when the officer came back to take my statement, I asked the question that would later change everything. "Did you check her cameras? She's always bragging about them. They must have caught everything." The officer nodded but said they'd need a warrant. Karen's lawyer was already there, twisting the story, claiming Emily had trespassed, that she lunged at her. The audacity burned in my chest. But deep down, I knew something. Karen's arrogance would be her downfall. She loved surveillance too much to ever turn it off. And if those cameras were rolling, they'd tell the story she couldn't lie her way out of. That night, as I sat beside Emily's hospital bed, holding her hand, I made a silent promise. I would make sure everyone saw what really happened that morning. Because somewhere in that quiet street where everything looked perfect, a hidden camera was still watching, waiting to expose the monster behind the HOA badge. And soon it would. The sirens hadn't even faded before the chaos began to settle into something colder: silence. That haunting, heavy silence that seeps into your bones after the screaming stops. I sat in the back of the ambulance with Emily's hand clutched in mine, my own hands stained red. The paramedics were shouting medical codes, but all I could hear was her faint, broken whisper. "Dad, did I do something wrong?" It shattered me. My little girl, bleeding because of a Wi-Fi password. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and panic. Machines beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat as nurses rushed her into surgery. The bullet had missed her vital organs, but the blood loss was severe. My wife, Laura, stood frozen in the hallway, her face ghost white, mascara running down her cheeks. I had never seen her that broken. She whispered, "How could a neighbor do this?" and then crumpled against the wall. I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. While Emily was in surgery, two detectives arrived, Detective Harris and Detective Monroe. Both looked exhausted, their badges dull under the fluorescent lights. Harris took out a small notebook and asked me to start from the beginning. So I told him everything. About the Wi-Fi, the harassment, the late-night knocks. About Karen's obsession with control and her constant threats to make us pay for disrespecting HOA policy. Monroe scribbled down notes, but kept looking at me like she was piecing a puzzle together. "Sir," Harris finally said, "she's claiming your daughter lunged at her with something metallic. Says she fired in self-defense." My jaw dropped. Metallic? She was holding a cardboard box from Amazon. Harris nodded. "That's what your neighbors said, too. We'll verify everything once we get the security footage." And there it was again, the footage, Karen's cameras, her pride, her proof of keeping the neighborhood safe. I knew she wouldn't have turned them off. She bragged about them constantly. State-of-the-art motion sensors, she'd say. Records, everything in 4K clarity. I leaned forward. "Detective, you need to check her cameras. Please, that'll show what really happened." Harris exchanged a look with Monroe. "We're working on a warrant. Her attorney's already stalling, saying the footage is private property. But if what you're saying is true, that footage could change everything." I clenched my fists. It will. Hours passed like days. The surgery ended at last, and the doctor came out, a tall man with kind eyes but a heavy tone. "She's stable for now," he said. "The bullet missed her lung, but it fractured a rib and caused significant tissue damage. She'll need rest and therapy, but she's lucky to be alive." Lucky. That word felt wrong. As I walked into her room, I saw Emily lying there, tubes and wires all over her. Her lips were pale, her breathing shallow. I sat beside her and brushed her hair from her forehead. "You're safe now," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. Because outside that hospital, Karen was already rewriting the story. By evening, news vans were parked on our street. Reporters crowded around the HOA sign at Willow Creek, flashing microphones, asking questions like, was it really self-defense? And is the HOA system broken? And right in the center of it all, Karen. Her face clean, her hair brushed, her voice calm. Standing beside her attorney, she said into the cameras, "I was terrified. That girl threatened me. I only did what I had to do to protect myself." It made my blood boil. She didn't even flinch when reporters asked about Emily's condition. She simply said, "It's tragic, but actions have consequences." I turned off the TV before Laura could see it. She didn't need more pain. That night, Detective Monroe called me. Her voice was low. "Mr. Lawson, we got partial access to the footage. But there's a problem. The recording from the time of the shooting is missing, deleted." I felt my stomach drop. Deleted? By who? "We don't know yet, but the system keeps cloud backups. If we can get the account info, we might retrieve it." That tiny spark of hope kept me awake all night. At 3 a.m., Emily stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. "Dad, is she in jail?" I hesitated. "Not yet, sweetheart, but she will be." Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't do anything wrong. I swear I held her hand tighter. "I know, honey. I know. The world will know, too." The next morning, we got a visit from the HOA vice president, Greg Turner. He looked uneasy, clutching a folder. "I'm so sorry," he said. "We never thought Karen would take it this far." "Then why is she still president?" I snapped. He looked down. "Because she made herself untouchable. Every vote, every signature. She manipulated it all." But he leaned closer. "She's got an external cloud account for her cameras. HOA files show she pays for a backup service under her personal email. If police can get that, you'll have your proof." It was the first time I saw light at the end of this nightmare. I immediately called Detective Monroe. She confirmed they'd subpoena the cloud provider. If there's backup, we'll find it, she said. But Karen wasn't sitting still. That afternoon, her lawyer filed a restraining order against us, claiming emotional harassment and public defamation. She was playing the victim flawlessly, smiling for cameras while my daughter lay in pain. Yet, fate has a strange way of turning arrogance into evidence, because later that evening, a neighbor named Mrs. Hendricks, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, knocked on my door at the hospital waiting area. She looked nervous, holding her tablet. "Mr. Lawson, I think I saw something." She handed me her device. My doorbell camera records everything. Karen's house is in the frame. It caught her walking over to your lawn with something in her hand. My heart raced as I pressed play. The footage showed Karen pacing across her driveway, shouting something inaudible, then pulling out the gun from her bag before stepping onto our lawn. There's no lunging, no threat, just her anger boiling over. The moment the gun fired, the timestamp matched perfectly with the 911 call. I called Detective Monroe immediately. When she saw the video, her voice shook. This changes everything. Once we match this with her cloud backups, she's done. I exhaled my first real breath in days. That night, as Emily finally drifted to sleep, I sat by her side and whispered, "You didn't just survive, sweetheart. You started something bigger. You exposed a monster who thought no one would stand up to her." I didn't know what would come next, the legal battles, the news coverage, the pressure from the HOA, but one thing was certain. Karen's carefully constructed image of power was beginning to crumble, and soon the world would see her true face through her own camera lens. Because truth, no matter how hard you try to erase it, always finds a way to be seen. By the third day, Willow Creek didn't feel like the same neighborhood anymore. The air was heavy with whispers, blinds stayed half closed, and everyone had an opinion, but no one dared say it aloud. The once quiet suburban street, with its manicured lawns and white mailboxes, had turned into a battlefield of rumors. From her hospital bed, Emily was slowly recovering. Though the nightmares kept her from resting, every time the door creaked open, she flinched. My wife and I took turns sitting beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, terrified of losing her all over again. But outside those sterile hospital walls, a storm was brewing, one we didn't yet understand. Karen wasn't hiding anymore. In fact, she was doubling down. Every local news station carried her statement. "I feared for my life. The family next door has a history of aggression. I acted to protect myself." Aggression? We had never even raised our voices at her. Yet somehow, she had managed to twist the narrative so far that some people actually believed her. The HOA Facebook group exploded with posts, half defending her, half calling her a menace. But the scariest thing? The posts defending her were detailed, filled with insider information about us that only Karen could have spread. She was trying to destroy us publicly. That afternoon, Detective Monroe called. Her voice carried a cautious tone. "Mr. Lawson, we got the subpoena." The provider released partial access to Karen's camera cloud, but the footage still looks tampered with. Someone logged in remotely and deleted a 4-minute window, the exact time of the shooting. My heart sank. So it's gone. Not entirely. The backup service auto-syncs thumbnails before full deletion. We can see fragments, images, every few seconds. She paused. "And from what I've seen, you're right. It looks bad for her." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" Monroe sighed. "In one frame, she's pointing the gun. Another shows your daughter holding a package. We're sending it to forensics to restore the deleted segment. It wasn't complete justice yet, but it was something." Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to split into sides. The Lawsons versus Karen Whitmore. Some neighbors stopped making eye contact altogether. Others secretly brought food to the hospital, whispering, "We're with you, but please don't tell anyone." One night, as I stepped outside the hospital to breathe, I saw Greg Turner, the HOA vice president again, waiting by his car. He looked pale. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded cautiously. He handed me a flash drive. "This isn't supposed to exist," he said quietly. "Karen made me install a secondary camera system a year ago, one only she had access to. It auto-backed up clips to the HOA server. She forgot I was the one who set up. I made a copy." I stared at him speechless. "What's on it?" "Everything," he whispered. "She's been spying on residents for months, even recording private conversations. It's bad." He walked away before I could ask another question. That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop, sitting in the dim hospital corridor while the machines hummed softly around Emily's room. Folder after folder appeared, each labeled with addresses. And then I saw it, our address. I clicked. The footage opened. It was our porch. Karen walking across the street, shouting, waving her phone. Emily turning, startled. Then, frame by frame, the gun raised. The shot. Emily falling. Karen standing motionless, then calmly walking back to her driveway, slipping the weapon into her bag. My hands trembled. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just murder, it was calculated. I forwarded everything to Detective Monroe that night. Within an hour, she called back, her tone no longer cautious, but sharp and determined. "Mr. Lawson, you just gave us what we needed. This footage is authentic. It timestamps perfectly with your 911 call. We're issuing a new warrant for her arrest." The next morning, news broke before sunrise. HOA president arrested for attempted murder. Shocking video evidence emerges. Cameras swarmed Willow Creek again. But this time, they weren't there for her side of the story. The leaked clip had spread online like wildfire. Karen's own surveillance camera showed everything: the arrogance, the rage, the moment she pulled the trigger. I watched it once, only once. It made my stomach turn, but there was also a bitter sense of justice seeing the world realize what she really was. At the hospital, nurses whispered about it. Strangers sent messages of support. Even the mayor's office released a statement condemning her actions. But as strange as it sounds, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty, because no amount of exposure could erase the image of my daughter lying on that porch. When Monroe visited later that day, she looked different, relieved but cautious. "We've arrested her," she said. "She's being charged with attempted murder, unlawful possession, and evidence tampering." But her lawyer's trying to claim mental instability. Mental instability? I repeated, disgusted. She's saying she suffered from neighborhood paranoia, that the HOA stress pushed her over the edge. I clenched my jaw. She wasn't paranoid. She was power-hungry. She wanted control, and when she lost it, she snapped. Monroe nodded slowly. "And the footage proves that." She hesitated before adding, "There's one more thing. The forensic team found older clips. It looks like she'd been recording your family for weeks, sometimes at night, through her window. We'll need you to review them." The thought made my skin crawl. That night, I sat by Emily again. She was stronger now, awake more often, but still weak. When I told her Karen had been arrested, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Good, but promise me she won't hurt anyone else." "I promise," I said. "No one else will go through what you did." But as I held her hand, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about truth and how fragile it can be when someone powerful decides to twist it. Days turned into weeks. Karen's arrest became national news. Talk shows discussed HOA power gone wrong. Online, people debated how neighborhood politics could turn deadly. But behind all that noise, I knew this wasn't just a headline, it was our life. I started keeping a journal of every event, every message, every police call, every threat she'd sent us over the months. Detective Monroe said the prosecutors wanted me to testify. Personally, I agreed without hesitation. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the ending. And yet one thing kept haunting me. Greg's words when he handed me the flash drive, "She's been recording residents for months." If that was true, how many others had she bullied? How many secrets did she hold in that camera network of hers? Maybe that's why, even after she was locked up, I didn't feel safe. Because monsters like Karen don't just vanish when the door closes behind them. They leave shadows that linger long after. But one thing was certain. The same cameras she used to control everyone were now the very things that would destroy her. The truth was out. The world had seen it. But the real fight, the one in the courtroom, was still ahead. And this time, I wasn't just a father seeking justice. I was a man who had learned that in a world full of lies, the only weapon stronger than power is proof. The morning after Karen's arrest, I woke up to something I hadn't felt in weeks. Quiet. Not peace, just quiet. No HOA letters taped to the door. No shouting from across the fence. But deep down, I knew this calm was only temporary. Because the deeper we dug into Karen's surveillance system, the more disturbing things came to light. Detective Monroe called me early that day. "Mr. Lawson, we need you to come down to the precinct. There's something you need to see." I remember the way her voice tightened. It wasn't the tone of victory, it was the tone of someone who'd seen too much. When I arrived, she led me into a small viewing room. The walls were lined with screens, and in the center monitor was an image that made my stomach twist. "Is that my daughter's room?" I asked slowly. Monroe nodded grimly. "Karen had remote cameras installed in several houses, illegally. Yours was one of them. We found a signal hidden inside one of the HOA's smart sensors she distributed last year. She was watching you for months." My blood ran cold. "You mean she was spying on my family?" "Yes," Monroe said quietly. "But that's not all. Wait until you see this." She hit play. The footage rolled. It was from Karen's own security feed, the one that supposedly went missing the day of the shooting. The camera view was from her porch, facing our house. The timestamp read 7:12 a.m. We saw Karen storming toward our yard, shouting angrily, phone in one hand, gun in the other. Emily stood still on the porch steps, holding her package. Her lips moved, probably saying something like, "Please stop." Then, just before Karen raised the gun, something strange happened. The camera glitched, skipping 1 second forward. But Monroe froze the frame and zoomed in. "Right there," she said. "See that reflection in her sunglasses?" I leaned closer. In the reflection, faint but visible, was the outline of another phone, someone recording from a distance. Monroe continued. We traced the footage. Turns out, Karen had a secondary camera synced to her phone, set to auto-record whenever motion was detected on her property. That feed uploaded directly to her private cloud. She deleted the main files, but forgot the mirror backup in her device cache. "So, you're saying," I whispered, "the full footage still exists?" Monroe smiled faintly. "It does, and it's even clearer than we expected. They played the recovered file. No distortion. No missing seconds. Every frame captured in painful detail. Karen pacing. Screaming. Her words cutting through the morning air like knives. "You think you can humiliate me? You think I don't know what you're doing?" Emily stepped back, clutching the box tighter. "Please stop shouting. You're scaring me." But Karen advanced. "You disconnected my access. You've ruined the system. You're corrupting this neighborhood." And then the gunshot. Emily fell, and Karen's face shifted, not to horror, not to panic, but to satisfaction. Her lips formed the words, "Finally, quiet." I had to look away. When the video ended, the room was silent except for the hum of the monitor. Monroe spoke softly. "This isn't just assault. This is premeditation." The DA's upgrading her charges to attempted murder with malice aforethought. My throat felt dry. "So this is it? This will finally end it?" "Yes," she said, "but there's more." She switched to another file. It showed Karen in her living room later that same day, hours after the shooting. She was pacing on the phone, whispering, "Delete everything from 7:10 to 7:15. Wipe the drive. Tell them it's a malfunction." Her tone was calm, calculated, evil. Monroe looked at me. That phone call was with her IT contractor. "We have him in custody too." He confessed she ordered the deletion. I sat in silence, trying to breathe through the weight pressing on my chest. I had always thought of Karen as a nuisance, a control freak. But what I saw in those videos wasn't just control. It was obsession. A dangerous, escalating madness disguised behind HOA bylaws and fake smiles. Later that evening, I returned to the hospital and showed Emily a short, censored clip, the part where Karen was arrested. She watched quietly, eyes glassy but determined. She thought she could hide forever, Emily murmured, but she filmed her own crime. Her words struck me deeply, because that's exactly what happened. Karen's need to control everything had become her undoing. The same camera she used to intimidate neighbors became the evidence that destroyed her. 2 days later, I was called to testify for the pretrial hearing. The courtroom was packed, neighbors, reporters, even HOA members in disbelief. Karen sat there, pale but defiant, her lawyer whispering frantically beside her. When the prosecutor played the footage for the judge, you could hear gasps echo through the room. The judge froze the frame, Karen aiming the gun, and said sternly, "This is beyond dispute. The defendant's actions were deliberate." Karen's face turned white. For the first time, she wasn't in control. As I stood on the witness stand, I looked straight at her. "You terrorized my family," I said, my voice shaking but strong. "You tried to kill a child over a password. But your own pride, your own cameras exposed you." She didn't look away, but her eyes flickered, fear, regret, maybe both. The judge ordered her held without bail until trial. That night, when I came home, I stepped out into the cool air of Willow Creek. The street was silent again, but this time not from fear, from freedom. Neighbors came out one by one, some hugging us, others apologizing for ever doubting. Greg approached, guilt in his eyes. "I shut down the HOA surveillance system permanently," he said. "We're rebuilding everything from the ground up. No more Karen." I looked toward Karen's house, dark, empty, the front window cracked from where police had broken in. The same camera that once watched us now sat lifeless, its red light dead. That night, as I tucked Emily into her hospital bed, she whispered, "Dad, can we move after this?" I smiled sadly. "Yeah, sweetheart, we'll find somewhere new. Somewhere with peace." But before turning off the light, she said something I'll never forget. She filmed everything, but she couldn't film what came next, people finally standing up to her. I kissed her forehead. No, she couldn't. Because the truth doesn't need a camera, it just needs courage. And for the first time, since that horrible day, I finally felt like we had both. The courthouse in Willow County had never seen such a crowd. Reporters lined the steps, their microphones pointed at the doors like vultures waiting for the next scandal to break. Inside, tension hung thicker than air itself. For months, our neighborhood had lived under the shadow of one woman's obsession with control. Now, the entire town would finally hear the truth through her own camera lens. Karen Whitmore entered the courtroom in a gray blazer, her hair perfectly set, her face expressionless. She looked more like a business executive than someone facing charges of attempted murder, evidence tampering, and illegal surveillance. But beneath her polished exterior, you could see the cracks forming, the twitch in her left eye, the way her jaw tightened each time someone whispered her name. Emily sat beside me, wearing a light blue hospital hoodie, still fragile but strong enough to attend. Her hand trembled slightly as she watched Karen take her seat. "That's her," Emily whispered, voice barely audible. "That's the woman who tried to kill me." I nodded. "Not tried, sweetheart." She failed. When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. The district attorney, Marissa Klein, stepped forward. She was sharp, confident, and utterly relentless. "Your Honor," she began, "this case isn't about a misunderstanding or an accident. It's about control. A woman so obsessed with power that she nearly took a young girl's life over a Wi-Fi password." Karen's attorney, a slick man named Victor Hall, countered immediately. "My client is a respected community leader. She acted out of fear and confusion after repeated harassment by the Lawson family. The so-called evidence is manipulated, spliced together to ruin her reputation." Marissa smiled coldly. "Then let's allow the evidence to speak for itself." She clicked a remote. The lights dimmed, and the courtroom screens came alive. The footage played, the same video Detective Monroe had shown me. Karen storming across the lawn. Emily clutching her package. The argument, the gun. The flash. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some gasped, some covered their mouths. Even the bailiff blinked, visibly shaken. When the video ended, Marissa turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not self-defense. That is a deliberate act of violence, followed by a calculated cover-up. Then came my turn. As I walked to the stand, my palms sweated, but my voice stayed steady. I told them everything. The harassment, the fines, the threats, the sleepless nights. I described how Karen had weaponized HOA rules to control the entire community and how it all led to that horrific morning. When Victor Hall cross-examined, he tried to twist my words. So, Mr. Lawson, you're suggesting this was all unprovoked? That your family never antagonized my client? I stared at him. Changing my Wi-Fi password isn't antagonizing someone. It's protecting my home. Hall sneered. And yet, your daughter laughed during the confrontation, correct? Maybe that's what triggered panic. She laughed. I said, voice rising, because she was nervous and scared, because she was facing a woman twice her size with a gun. The courtroom murmured again. Hall quickly sat down. Then, Marissa called her final witness, Greg Turner, the HOA vice president. Greg looked uneasy as he took the stand, adjusting his glasses. Karen asked me to install hidden cameras in multiple homes. She said it was for community safety, but I found out later she used them to monitor people she didn't like. When I refused to help her delete the footage, she threatened me with lawsuits. His voice cracked as he looked at me. I didn't come forward sooner because I was scared. But seeing what she did to that girl, I couldn't stay silent. Karen's composure began to crumble. Her eyes darted from Greg to me, to the jury, then back again. For the first time, she didn't look powerful. She looked trapped. Her lawyer whispered something, but she ignored him and suddenly stood up, shouting, "They're all lying. I was protecting the neighborhood. They don't understand what it's like. People breaking rules, ruining everything I built." The judge slammed his gavel. "Ms. Whitmore, sit down or you'll be held in contempt." But she didn't stop. "They all used me. I did everything for them, and this is how they repay me." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, trembling with rage. "You think I'm a monster? I was keeping order." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed, and the judge ordered security to restrain her. It was over. 2 hours later, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. Karen's face went pale. The moment she heard the word, her body sagged in her chair, the arrogance drained from her completely. The judge sentenced her to 25 years without parole for attempted murder and 5 additional years for unlawful surveillance. As she was escorted out, she looked back once, not with regret, not even with shame, but with disbelief, like she couldn't understand how the world she built had turned against her. After the verdict, the courthouse steps were filled with reporters, but for the first time, I didn't care about cameras. I only cared about Emily, who was finally smiling again. She leaned against me and whispered, "Dad, she can't hurt anyone now, right?" I shook my head. "Not anymore. She's gone for good." Detective Monroe approached us. "You, too, are stronger than most families I've met. Not everyone could have stood up to someone like her." I smiled faintly. We didn't have a choice. Monroe handed me a small envelope. "One last thing. We found this in her house." Inside was a printed photo, a still from the footage of that morning. It showed Emily standing on the porch, sunlight on her face, seconds before the gunshot. Underneath, in Karen's handwriting, were the words, "No more disobedience." I crumpled the photo in my hand. Guess she finally got the silence she wanted? Monroe nodded. "Yeah, but now the world knows what that silence cost." That evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek, the neighborhood gathered on our front lawn. People brought candles, flowers, and handwritten notes for Emily. Even the mayor came by to thank her for her courage. For the first time, the neighborhood wasn't ruled by fear, it was united by truth. Emily looked around at the glowing lights and whispered, "Dad, maybe we should keep the Wi-Fi password just between us this time." I laughed softly, pulling her close. "Yeah, sweetheart. Between us and no one else." And as the candles flickered in the breeze, I realized something. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or revenge. Sometimes, justice is just a quiet night where your daughter is safe and the lights on your porch are the only ones watching. Weeks passed after the trial, yet the echoes of that gunshot still haunted my dreams. Every night, I'd wake up hearing Emily's scream, the sound of the bullet hitting wood, and Karen's chilling words replaying in my mind. You'll regret this. But when I opened my eyes, the silence that followed was no longer threatening. It was peace, the kind that comes after a storm finally burns itself out. Our street, once ruled by fear and HOA fines, was now unrecognizably calm. The Whitmore house stood empty, its windows boarded, grass overgrown, and the old security cameras dismantled. No one dared buy it, not even at auction. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with false authority, and no one wanted to live inside that memory. Emily had come a long way in her recovery. The scars on her side were healing, but the emotional ones ran deeper. She didn't like going near the porch, and sudden loud sounds still made her flinch. But every morning, she'd water the flowers outside and feed the stray cat that had started visiting. It was her quiet way of reclaiming her space, the very place she was almost taken from. One afternoon, we were sitting on that same porch when Detective Monroe stopped by, dressed in plain clothes now that the case was over. She smiled softly. "You too, holding up?" Emily nodded. "Better. Still hate the sound of doors slamming, though." Monroe chuckled. "That's normal. Trauma fades slowly, but it does fade." She handed me a small brown envelope. "This just came from evidence release. I thought you'd want it." Inside was the recovered USB, the one Greg had given me with Karen's surveillance files. Monroe continued, "The court authorized you to keep it. It's officially yours now. You can destroy it, archive it, whatever you want." I stared at the drive. That tiny piece of metal had carried so much pain, but also truth. It was the proof that saved Emily's life and brought a tyrant to justice. "I think," I said quietly, "we'll keep it as a reminder that even when evil watches, truth watches back." Over the following months, something beautiful began to happen in Willow Creek. The HOA disbanded and was replaced with a voluntary neighborhood committee, one focused on helping, not controlling. Neighbors who once stayed silent started speaking up about the harassment they'd endured from Karen. Some confessed that they'd paid her under the table just to avoid fines. Others admitted she had bugged their security systems too. But the best change of all was the way people started looking out for each other. Kids played in the yards again. Families talked over fences. Someone even repainted the old community mailbox, the one Karen used to inspect weekly, with bright colors and flowers. It was like the neighborhood had finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. One evening, Greg stopped by. He'd resigned from the HOA completely and started volunteering at a youth tech center downtown. "Figured I'd use what I know for something good this time," he said. He turned to Emily. "Kid, you did more for this neighborhood than any of us adults ever could." Emily smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stop." Greg nodded. "And you did. You showed everyone that standing up, even to someone powerful, matters." After he left, Emily looked up at me. "Dad, do you think she regrets it?" "Karen?" I thought for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe she still thinks she was right. But either way, she can't hurt anyone now. And that's enough. She leaned her head on my shoulder. I just wish I could forget her face. I wrapped an arm around her. "One day you will. But we'll never forget what she taught us, how dangerous control can be when kindness disappears." Months later, we decided to move. Not out of fear, but to start over somewhere new. On our last night in Willow Creek, Emily insisted on doing something symbolic. She plugged in the USB one last time, scrolling to the final image of that morning, the moment before the shot. Then she dragged the folder to the trash bin on the screen. "Goodbye, Karen," she whispered and hit delete. The screen went black. And just like that, the past was gone, not erased, but finally laid to rest. We relocated to a smaller town 2 hours away, a quiet place surrounded by trees, where no one cared about mailbox heights or lawn regulations. Our new neighbors waved, not watched. The difference was like night and day. One weekend, we visited a local community center that held awareness programs about neighborhood safety and abuse of authority. When the organizer asked for speakers, Emily raised her hand. My heart nearly stopped. She walked to the microphone, her voice calm but steady. Sometimes, the people who talk the most about rules are the ones breaking them. My neighbor shot me because I changed a Wi-Fi password, but her camera showed the truth. So, I learned something important. Never be afraid to speak up, because silence protects the wrong side. The audience stood and clapped. I watched her, proud beyond words. That fragile, terrified girl had turned her pain into strength. Afterward, as we walked out into the evening air, she said, "Dad, maybe that camera wasn't all bad after all. It gave us the truth." I smiled. Yeah, but it's the courage behind it that made the truth matter. That night, as we sat by our new porch under a sky full of stars, I thought about everything we'd been through, about how a single act of defiance, a simple password change, had torn open a web of control, lies, and cruelty. But it also revealed something powerful: the resilience of ordinary people when faced with injustice. Karen's downfall wasn't just about evidence. It was about exposure of what happens when fear meets defiance and hate meets truth. And now, as I looked over at Emily laughing softly at something her mom said, I realized something profound. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes justice is just being able to watch your child smile again. Because in the end, Karen's cameras had captured everything, except the one thing she could never understand: love. If this story moved you, if you believe no parent should ever fear for their child because of power or pride, share it. Let it remind others that truth always finds its way, even through the darkest corners. Speech Balloon, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? And if you stand for justice, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. Because sometimes the smallest act of courage can expose the biggest lie.